Hello, everyone, and welcome to Fleet's Random Ramblings, the last ramblings, actually, of 2025. We have a very special topic today, so as usual, when we have special topics and special guests on to discuss those topics, standard rules apply. Please keep your questions related to the topic under discussion where at all possible until, ideally, the last hour, where we will open up for regular questions with our guest hopefully still with us. But without further ado, let's get back into it. I'm very pleased to welcome to the show Daniel, who runs the Victory in the Pacific Twitter account specifically related to the board game in question. So, it's a pleasure to have you. Tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It's a board game about the Pacific theater of World War II. And it's meant to have a fair amount of historical flavor in the game. So if I compare it to something like Axis and Allies, I think that most people will recognize. You have a generic plastic ship, and your battleship is the same as all your others, is the same as everyone else's. Where in this game, you get a named counter with the Prince of Wales or the Yamato or the Missouri with different amounts of gunnery, armor, etc., roughly correlating to at least how powerful or not the designer felt the ships were in reality. And you go back and forth with your opponent for 8 turns, representing Pearl Harbor through the middle of 1944, and roll some dice, make some moves, and see who comes out on top.
Middle of 1944, not mid 45.
Yeah. The standard game goes through summer of 44, corresponding to the Battle of the Philippine Sea, because after that, the Japanese Navy still existed, but wasn't really capable of challenging the Allied fleets and winning a major battle. I mean, they tried to fight Leyte after that, and of course, it was a disaster, but they had virtually no carrier air cover by that point. And if the game continued an extra year, the Japanese player would just historically be having their fleet sit in port and get sunk in harbor. So that wouldn't be as fun. So it goes through the summer of 44. There is an optional rule to play a 9th turn that goes through Leyte Gulf, and then you can get to play with the Alaska and Shinano and a couple of extra ships. I find the 8-turn game to be good enough where I don't usually play the extra one, because then the Allies get an extra turn of counterattack. You have to throw in some special rules to balance it. I prefer and I think most people do the 8-turn game out of the box.
Fair enough. So I've got the picture up. I've got the picture up right now. So explain to me exactly what we're looking at here. Sort of run me through what we're looking at here with the image that you've put in Rambling's text. That
it divides the Pacific into 13 sea zones. And each zone is worth a different amount of points to the Allies or the Japanese for controlling the area. You see some of the areas have the rising sun or the U.S. flag. At the end of a turn, whoever controls it places the flag and gets the points. And since that flag means you control the shipping and most of the small island bases and lanes in there, you'll get some benefits if you try and fight there the next turn. And it also blocks enemy movement for the following turn, because the turns are 4 months long, and so the ships could have theoretically gotten anywhere in the ocean in 4 months, but you can't just sail right through enemy-controlled waters without being harassed and scouted and stuff. So instead of moving through that flag, you got to stop and fight there where you are. And so what the Japanese often try and do is, I know there's ships there, so it's hard to read some of the sea zones, but the Greater East Asia Prosperity Sphere they tried to build, roughly going from Indonesia over to the Marshalls and up towards Midway and the Aleutian Islands. If the Japanese can build that network of flags there, the Allies are blocked from raiding Japan and the Marianas, which, they were historically generally unable to do. Thus, the Doolittle raid happened. But, you obviously, if you're the Japanese, you want to try and do better than your historical counterpart in the game, and not necessarily win the war. Generally, at the end of the game, the situation is such that if this were the real war, the Allies are winning. The game is just whoever wins on points. I like to think of it as, if you lose the game as the Allies, you're roughly your Nimitz, and you got fired because you performed insufficiently well, and Japan is still hanging on and bloodying your fleet way longer than they should have.
Yeah, like if the like basically it's the Japanese doing what they would need to do historically to win, quote unquote, or for them to perceive they're winning, continue to deliver hammer blows like Coral Sea and Pearl Harbor again and again and again and again, taking no losses is the only way they could possibly win.
Yes,
but the odds of that is impossible.
Yeah, if they continue to inflict heavier losses while they're pulling back and they're still holding on to New Guinea and Indonesia and the Marshalls into 44, when historically the Allies, should be in the Philippines and Guam by then they're in a better position than historically. If you're looking at the image, you can see the different ship counters. They're, for a game in 1977, especially, they're pretty decent quality cardboard. You've got big numbers that even older gamers with eyesight issues or younger gamers with eyesight issues can see pretty well from across the board. There's 3 numbers on each ship representing gunnery, armor, and speed. And then carriers have a 4th number for their airstrike. Both sides have some land-based air and amphibious units also. And then there's 2 different types of bases on the map. There's major anchorages like Pearl Harbor or Ceylon, Singapore, that ships can kind of base at from anywhere in the map and that are rather difficult for the opponents to invade. And then there's smaller island bases like Guadalcanal or Midway that can be invaded by amphibious units. And you have to already be there to base there. You can't, let's say, fight a battle up in the North Pacific and then base in Guadalcanal because it doesn't have a major anchorage ready to receive a fleet from across the ocean.
Yeah.
So a big part of the strategy there is if you capture these island bases, then your land-based air can fly from those bases and lock down an area while your fleet goes and makes a big raid on some other area, possibly escorting some amphibious units that take a base there. And then on the next turn, you restage your air units there and your fleet moves on forward. At least, that's the theory. Your opponent may not let you do it, but that's what you want to try to do.
So, a few things I'd like to ask. So firstly, you mention raiding a lot as a term. Like, is that so? Are there not offensive operations apart from raiding? How does it? So, what does that mean? What does raiding mean?
Sure, it is an actual game term, and it's the movement combat sequence is to me the thing that makes it one of my all-time favorite games in terms of. I think it's the way a lot of people will think about a Go or chess or something, and that the appeal of it is I'm sitting down with this person. It's my mind versus their mind. Who's going to outthink and outmaneuver who? And the reason that works in this game is you open the turn by patrolling ships, which is you're trying to control the seas. You're staging these ships here you're going to have a presence there, hopefully for weeks or months at a time, control the shipping lanes. But you have to commit those ships at the very beginning of the turn. For people looking at the image, those ships are the colored side. There's you see a lot of the Japanese ships with a red side up. Those are the patrolling ships. After that, the land-based air units deploy. After that, the amphibious units move out. And then at the end of the turn, your ships that have flipped to, in this case, you're seeing the turn 1 Japanese offensive in that picture. So it's mostly the Japanese raiding all over. And the map is a little cut off there. So the Pearl Harbor raid force the carriers are kind of off the edge of the map here, but you see they've sent some raiding ships after Midway and some others to help out, take out the Prince of Wales and repulse. Those ships don't count for controlling the sea area. So if you win a battle only with raiding ships having survived at the end, you don't place that flag we talked about earlier. You don't get any points, but you may have sunk enemy ships and defeated their patrollers to keep them from getting the points.
Yeah,
so
I can see that the British, the Allied player is really suffering here. From what I can see, it looks like, assuming the 336, the 336 is probably repulse. She's sunk. Yeah. But it looks like they haven't managed to get Prince of Wales. She's damaged, correct. I think. Yes. But she looks like she's not sunk.
Yes, I can go through that a little more in a bit. But yes, the Prince of Wales is heavily hit there, but is still afloat at the time this this image was taken. And then on the south end of the map, the Indian Ocean, the Coral Sea, there are some Australian, British, and American patrolling ships that are just frozen in place. The turn one, as the Allies, you don't do a lot because you don't know the war, when and where the war is starting. And then starting on turn two, you can begin to make your counterattack, or at least your defense of your position. So you get to those raiding ships wait till the end of the turn, which is huge in terms of information and knowledge. Because when you throw those patrollers out, the board's empty. When you throw those raiding ships out, the board is full and you know where everything is. So a big part of the balance is, what do I hold back to raid so I get to see my opponent's deployment first? But if you don't patrol anything, you're not going to score any points. And each phase, Japan goes first, then the Allies, to reflect the code breaking. So that's you have the initiative as the Japanese player, but you got to make your move without knowing. Like, you make your patrollers, you don't know anything. The Allied player patrols, okay, I know where the Japanese patrol. I have some idea of your intentions. And it goes like that through each phase. And only after every unit has deployed do you start fighting any battles, one sea area at a time, until they've all been fought. And that makes it just different to me than most other war games, even a lot of really good ones. Because in most games, when you move your stuff, the battle starts. Again, I'll use Axis and Allies, not dissing it at all. I think it's a really good game and I enjoy it. But just as an example that I think a larger number of people are familiar with, if the Germans attack into Russia, you move your tanks, infantry, fighters in. Okay, now we're fighting that battle. The Russians sit there and react and fight, but the Germans just move and then the fight happens. And the Russians move and the fight happens. And in this game, each side moves and deploys back and forth. You're seeing more and more of your opponent's move. Okay, he's doing this, therefore I can do this. Oh, it looks like he wants to do this, so maybe I shouldn't do this. All right, now we've put all our ships here. Now let's get out the dice and see who wins these fights. And, like any dice game, there's luck involved. Sometimes you win or lose based on that. The more I play, the more I found that usually the person who makes the better moves wins the game. As it is with any, I think, well-designed dice game, sometimes the luck predominates, but usually, especially given the volume of dice you're rolling, the law of large numbers, I think, comes into play. It's really rare to have a game where, if I'm honest with myself afterward, maybe immediately I get some bad luck and I feel like, I played well, I got screwed. But honestly, usually looking back, it's, the luck pretty much even out over the game. Maybe I missed a little here or there, but the better thing to do is think, what could I have done differently? Because I can't control the dice, but I can control me.
Fair enough. So I'm looking at this. So it seems like the Allied powers are, you've got the British and the Americans, which I expected, but also the Dutch as well. The Dutch are also here. So that's nice to actually see them represented.
There is one Dutch ship in the game. With a few exceptions, the game only includes heavy cruisers and larger to keep the piece count manageable. If you threw the light cruisers and destroyers, the pieces would coat the map and the game would take 3 times as long. But the Dutch do get their light cruiser De Ruyter in the game just to represent the Dutch Navy's contribution.
So how does screening forces work? How are they managed? Because sending out a capital ship without screen is like basically asking for death.
So I didn't quite understand the question.
So how does the game manage light cruisers and destroyers? Because you wouldn't send capital ships to sea without escort.
They're kind of presumed to be there. That's really it, just for simplicity and playing time. Anytime ships are fighting, you can, if you want to think about it, you can assume that they're there, but they don't. You don't get to roll extra dice representing them. They kind of cancel each other out in the background and don't affect the game.
Okay.
Yeah, the submarine warfare is largely abstracted out too. The designer notes pointed out that Indonesia could probably be worth more points to Japan than it is, but you presume that in the background below the scale of the game, those points are being reduced by the Allied submarines. There is a submarine counter in the game. It's just one. It is one piece that gets to roll once a turn that represents the fact that there were subs. So it's there, but again, if you included 100 submarine pieces for each side, then the game would get pretty unmanageable pretty fast.
Yeah, understandable. So this is a big broad strokes game centered around capital ships and carriers.
Exactly. And each turn represents potential campaigns more than battles, because to get those 3.5 years of war in 8 turns, each turn is 3 to 6 months. And so an action could be something where a couple of ships met and fought a battle for one day, but especially like are in the South Pacific Ocean around Guadalcanal, the Eastern Solomons, First and Second Guadalcanal, Santa Cruz, all those battles could happen in one game battle in one turn that lasts for several rounds with a fair number of ships going down on each side.
Fair enough.
And yeah, while I'm up there, let me switch, since you mentioned the Dutch Nostradamus, let me add in a second picture there with a close-up of some of the pieces, just so people can get an idea if they're, safe and not driving, of how they look in the game. That's from the online aid of the game, so I tried to get some pictures of the ship.
Well, that's actually that answers Timu's question. Yeah, there is an online version of the game. There you are, Timu. There is an online version of the game.
Yeah. There's currently nothing like, the Twilight Struggle app on Steam, or RallyTheTroops.com has 20 or so different war games. I love it. You can play in the browser, and it enforces rules and stuff for you. There's nothing like that for this one. Avalon Hill published the game in 1977. I don't actually know who owns the rights these days. Most of the hobby support, really all of the hobby support, is fans just with volunteering free time. So this is from.
Wouldn't surprise me if someone's made a module for Tabletop Simulator. I would be very surprised.
There is a Tabletop Simulator module for it, yes. And the picture I showed there is from Vassal, which is used for a lot of games like this. You can move your pieces, save the board state, send the file to your opponent, and then to roll the dice, there's an email address you send that rolls it back. But the game doesn't enforce any rules. It's just a virtual game box, but a pretty decent quality one. So you can see, again, for the image there, the Congo 4 gunnery, 3 armor and 6 speed versus the Yamato 6 gunnery, 9 armor. As you would expect, the Yamato is much more powerful than the rest. And the jet, notice some of the ship's gunnery or the airstrike values have that white circle around them. That represents a bonus to the dice in some way that either represents elite pilots, the long lance torpedoes, or advanced gunnery radar, which is why that Missouri's got those 5 bonus shots there, which, as it could have maybe done historically, might outgun the 6 shots of the Yamato thanks to the radar. But the Japanese carriers in the late game there, the Taiho, the Chitose, they don't get the bonus, because at that point, the Japanese player is all out of well-trained elite pilots to equip their new carriers with.
I understand that why that's done the way it's done, but I would argue that I suppose that should really be dependent on how the game's gone. Like, if the Japanese have inflicted heavy losses and suffered none, there should be enough pilots to at least have, but I suppose, again, that's kind of adding overall too much complexity.
Yeah, I think so. I think it would be realistic. Like, the ship counters don't change throughout the game. So realistically, that Soryu getting 3 bonus airstrikes, if the Soryu survives to the late game and the Japanese have suffered heavy damage, the Soryu should probably be out of pilots, and that 3 should flip to a standard 3 instead of a bonus 3. But then you have to put extra counters in the set. I saw someone commented that Formidable should be rated higher. I tend to agree with that. I think most of the ship ratings are pretty reasonable, especially given that the game's almost 50 years old. But those armored decks on the Indomitable and Formidable should really give them a 3 or 4 for armor, probably, instead of a 2. The armor was mostly just based on the displacement of the ships, but if I designed the game, I would have given them that bonus.
And also, Formidable should at least have the same airstrike rating as Taiho. Like, I don't get why Wasp, again, and also especially, why does Wasp have a higher strike rating than Taiho does? Like, Taiho's a much bigger and better carrier. Like, this is
the Akagi, the Shokaku, the Enterprise, Saratoga, those all have 4s. Yeah, Wasp in relation probably should be a 3.
Yeah.
There's definitely, you guys definitely picked out the same couple of quibbles I would have if I were redesigning it, but it's a good enough game.
Warspite as well. Like, she should have gunnery radar. She should absolutely. Warspite. She's fresh off her. Yes, I will casually obliterate a trio of Italian light cruisers just for the heck of it with gunnery radar.
What time scale was that? Because the British in this game do have to send ships back and forth from the Mediterranean, and Warspite in this game is only in the first few turns. So you probably know much more about this than me, and I may have my time wrong.
She's fresh off. She's fresh off doing that. She's fresh off.
Okay, she came to the Pacific after getting that.
Yeah.
Okay, because she does have to return to the Mediterranean or Atlantic halfway through the game.
Yeah.
And I thought that was when she got refitted. If it was earlier, then that may have been something the designer missed, or that wasn't known as well or easily researchable in '77. I don't.
To be fair,
she was sent back to the Mediterranean in '43.
And Cape Matapan was before she came to the Pacific, and that's when she pulled off the whole.
I did not recall the timing of that. That was the one where they multiple Italian heavy cruisers, right?
Yes.
Pola and the Fume. Okay.
Yeah, literally where 3 British battleships rock up to point blank range and just obliterate 3 Italian heavy cruisers with contemptuous ease. Yeah. This leads me to another interesting question. So, obviously, this is based on a lot of the moves that the Allies get and a lot of the ships that are available to both sides in terms of reinforcements and new construction is very, very historical from what I'm seeing. Are there any forks of the game that allow for, let's say, any custom rule sets that allow for, like, certain differences? So, let's say the Japanese player, if they're doing well, and they have lots of carriers, can choose, actually, I want Shinano as a battleship, please, not as a carrier.
I've heard of optional rules where that's done. One that I really liked that addressed what we said earlier. There was an optional rule I saw in an article from years ago where those late game Japanese carriers can get the bonus to their airstrikes if they delay entering the game by 1 turn, representing spending some extra time training the pilots up. It's not in the official rule book. I don't know if I've ever played that way, but a lot of the optional rules that came with the game back then aren't really used much. Most of the optional rules that are used today are, again, fan hobby service someone came up with, because I've noticed this in a lot of games where there's an initiative side and a react side. And at least for the first 5 turns of the game, the Japanese player in this game generally has the initiative. As a beginner, it's much easier to react because you don't know what to do with the initiative. You're sitting there, okay, I got these pieces. I see what they do. I'm supposed to score some points. How do I actually play this, though? And getting to wait and see your opponent's move and then react to that is much easier. But as you gain more experience, the initiative side gets stronger. Twilight Struggle, I think, is a pretty well-known one that works that way. The Cold War game, the USSR is considered favored in tournaments, but if you open it up out of the box with no idea, America's much easier to play. And it's like that with this one, too. So there are some face-to-face tournaments, and there's an online play-by-email ladder and stuff. And those, there are often optional rules used to actually turn down the Japanese because you get to use that initiative well. You get to see your historical counterparts' mistakes and not make them. And also, as a simple game that's intended to fit in one evening, there's not complicated logistics rules. And the Japanese thus aren't really as hamstrung as they could have been. So they can make, they had plans to make aggressive moves had they taken Guadalcanal or Port Moresby, to make aggressive moves towards Australia or Samoa. So I think a good game should allow them to do that because the actual allies were afraid of that happening. They should have to guard against it. It's a little too easy for the Japanese to make an aggressive move with large portions of their fleet not worrying about the oil and make an attempt to seize Samoa or Pearl Harbor, generally one or the other. Or even Australia, but Australia is really, really hard to take in the game as it would have been in reality. I think if they had tried that, they would have found it to be their troops would have been stranded ashore against a hostile population, and the supply lines would have been cut, and they would have just been in a giant continent-sized prisoner of war camp, probably. But
I mean, it gets even better than that. It's Australia. The spiders want a word.
wildlife itself will fight against you.
The emus.
Yeah, it'll be like that scene in Beauty and the Beast where they invade the castle and all the furniture is attacking them. It'd be just sort of that.
Yeah.
So the game does allow the Japanese, I think, a little too much non-logistical offensive leeway. And so a lot of players will play with some optional rules that, for example, preserve the Allied carriers on turn one. Because if anyone looking still at that first picture, there's Allied carrier groups that are there in Australia. They're not actually in Australia. They just are in a kind of null position at the start, indeterminate.
They're doing what they were doing historically, doing ferry runs.
Right. They might be in the Panama Canal or in San Diego. They might be headed to Midway or Wake. And after the Pearl Harbor raid, Nagumo has to decide if he's staying for that third wave or not, that they historically did not do. And then you randomly determine whether the Allied carriers show up. And in the earlier days of the game, that made for really exciting play. It felt like these are the historical dilemmas. As players gained more experience, they realized, yeah, the problem is you could end up with the Lexington by itself facing down half the Japanese Navy, and it gets sunk. Oh, and then the Yorktown gets torpedoed by a submarine, and so now the Allied player is starting the next turn down a couple of carriers, which is as bad as you probably think it would be. And so there's generally optional rules to ensure the survival of carriers, and sometimes, given the Japanese ability to make a greater effort towards Hawaii and Samoa than they probably could have made in reality, there are some extra rules that keep the Allied reinforcements from being sort of ambushed as they arrive. And I find with moderately experienced players, add those in, you get a really good balanced game. And often at tournaments, you can bid points, but you play that set of rules with reasonably experienced players, nobody's bidding that much. But if you like one side or another, you may bid half a point to a point and a half for it. But what I often like to do in that situation, I study the game pretty intently, and I try to be competitive at these events. And I like to say, hey, this is a set of option rules I think is balanced. Let's just roll a dice for sides. Or if I know I'm playing a player who, it's a small niche thing, if I'm encountering a newbie and I don't want to, last thing I want to do is have someone muster up the courage to show up to their first tournament and then feel like that was a waste of time. I'm probably going to say, hey, I think this rule set is balanced. If you want to play it, pick your side and we'll go. Because I want to make sure they know I'm not trying to take advantage. But trust me, you want these rules in the game. So here, pick your side. And if somebody ever shows up and says, you know what, I want to play with a rule set that the game came with, that's what I play at home. I don't want to show up and play somebody else's variant. Okay, you're allowed to play with the rules out of the box.
Oh, completely. So it's very it's one of those games that looks easy to learn, hard to master. From what I'm looking at it, I'm actually going to swap the image back over to the other one because I think it's a very good snapshot of the game as it is. So from what I'm seeing there, basically the Japanese start big but have very limited reinforcements, and it's basically and the US is basically just waiting for the sledgehammer. They are slowly building and waiting for the sledgehammer, and then they will drop the sledgehammer, preferably on the Japanese's forehead. Yep.
As I said earlier, the Japanese initiative tends to last for the first 5 turns. The reason is on turn 6, all those light carrier conversions plus the big Essex class come into the game, as well.
The swarm.
The swarm. You get the new battleships, the South Dakotas, the Iowas. All of a sudden, now you have a bigger fleet, and you still get to move second. The Japanese still have a lot of counterplay available, but they're definitely on the defensive at that point. If they've been able to inflict enough attrition, capture enough bases, build that perimeter of flags, they've still got a good shot. But if at that point, if after 5 turns, as the Japanese, your fleet's already fallen apart and you have no perimeter, you're in a lot of trouble. The swarm begins, and if you've held on sufficiently as the allies at that point, you have a lot of ships to play with, and they're generally good ones too.
My next
which again
question...
is why the game ends after those 8 turns. If the game kept going, oh look, now you get the midway class carriers, which are so powerful they almost break the game's rating system. Oh, and also the war in the Atlantic is pretty much over. So now here comes
the British Pacific Fleet.
Right, the optional rule I've seen for that, the Indomitable comes in, and it does have 3 armor and the 3 air striker, maybe the Indefatigable, the Unicorn.
I mean like you're talking about like it has to be that, because if it's the historical British Pacific Fleet, you're talking about 9 additional aircraft carriers, 4 additional fast battleships, plus.
And I think even a French ship or two, right? Didn't the Richelieu come along?
Yeah, the Richelieu as well. Yeah, like 5. Like you're talking about that's just death. That's just death.
Yeah, and the tattered remnants of the Japanese fleet at that point would be so overwhelmed. You'd have to change the whole point system. But I have seen an optional rule for it that attempts to do that. That says, hey, if you want these historical ships from the later American ships and the British Pacific Fleet in the game, here's how it works. But you'd have to print out your own counters for it and such.
It's basically like at that point, the only way for the Japanese to keep their points of control is basically, you've basically got to do what we said before. A Japanese player, to have a chance of winning against the British Pacific Fleet, basically has to, every single turn, win major victories back to back, sinking carriers, cruisers, battleships, continuously, and losing nothing, so that when the British Pacific Fleet shows up, they are still an equivalent force to fight it. But that's just so unbelievably unlikely and impossible that...
Yeah, it's as the Japanese player in this game, a lot of times I and many other players kind of want to avoid fighting the limited Royal Navy that's there as it is, just because you've already got your hands full. If you can take Singapore, lock down Indonesia, your land-based air can mostly hold the British at bay. But if you end up in a fight, you don't really want to throw the Congo class up against the Warspit and Ramillies, because the British have as many battleships as you. Their armor is as good or better. I mean, unless you send in the Nagato and Yamato, maybe, because the Rodney and Nelson aren't there, so you don't have any 16-inchers. But it just adds to the attrition. And if you as Japan are trying to do that and fight the Americans at the same time, it's too much most of the time. The only time I think it's really worth it is if you can actually capture Ceylon and the Andaman Islands, which I've gone for a few times. It's fun to try, but it's tough to make that work as it would have been.
Understandably. Gunner officers talking about no amphibious assault mode, so let's actually discuss that. How do amphibious assault work? Is shore bombardment a thing? Can land-based air soften up bases before you hit them? How does it all work?
No, it's a fairly straightforward mechanism. Each side has some amphibious units. They move out after land-based air, but before raiding ships. And the island bases can be seized by them, but the major ports can't. You can't land one amphibious unit in Australia or Japan. 1 or 2 division of Marines is not taking the whole archipelago. But you can take the New Hebrides or Saipan with that force. But they have to survive a round of combat first, which means opposing carrier in the area or land-based air may be able to take them out before they land. It's a question of targeting priorities. If you're coming in with amphibious units at my base, then how many shots do I want to divert on your amphibious units versus trying to sink your ships, probably your carriers ideally, because they are the most important ships. The other way that can affect things is you have to have some sort of anchorage or port in the sea zone to deploy your land-based air. So if you've only got one and you put land-based air units there and your base gets seized out from under your land-based air unit has to leave the turn. So that can really swing a battle if that happens. You can think of that as the historical Guadalcanal battles as the Allied player deploying land-based air into the South Pacific Sea Zone, Japanese sending amphibious units at Guadalcanal to try and knock those units out, If you take Henderson Field, the land-based air presence goes away, but historically they never did, and the Americans could land their own units there to defend. There's no land combat really in the game. If two amphibious units meet on land, they mutually annihilate each other. And of course, the whole land war in China, Burma, and India is all not present in the game, just to focus on the Navy. I have seen Pacific War games that include those in it, several good ones. None of them that I know of that you can sit down and play in a single evening. That's just so much to manage. So in the game, you just presume the Japanese are fighting in China and just focus on the Navy. Because you're Yamamoto or Nimitz, so you're not concerning yourselves with maneuvering the land forces around the Chinese theater.
Yeah. I mean, what I'm going to say is I'm just going to bring up something that could be called a competitor/alternative. Are you aware of the Pacific Theater of Operations games that were made? Of which I think there were 4, of which one of the most prolific was 2.
Is that the PC game?
That's the one.
I'm vaguely familiar with it. I haven't played it myself, so I'm pretty ignorant of the details other than it's a computer game about the Pacific War.
Yeah. It's basically taking the concept of victory in the Pacific and kind of amping it up to 11. So you do have land combat, you do have you do manually direct naval engagements, you do roll for your airstrikes, submarine patrols, etc. But I feel like it takes forever and a day to play. Even just, well, you can't really play it multiplayer, it's single player. And I feel like it kind of misses a lot of the sort of I like Victory in the Pacific simplicity in the way in which it's set out. It also gives the Japanese a realistic goal to seize points of control in preparation for the counterattack and hold those points of control until 44.
Yeah, that makes for a victory. You need to score X points while you can, and then have the Allied counterattack score at least only X-1 points, and you win.
Yeah. Which at that point I suppose you could say the assumption would be, like you say, yes, Nimitz could be fired, but depending on the level of losses inflicted, you could actually say the Japanese actually achieved their goal of actually making the Allies go, yeah, maybe, possibly, with the whole German situation ongoing, perhaps, possibly, maybe we could do this whole negotiation bit. Maybe.
Right, you could think of it as the Japanese player at least making the Allied player consider that, and maybe the war ends not in a great position for Japan still, but not with being atom bombed either.
I think the best the Japanese could hope for in this situation. I spoke with my good friend and colleague Drakenefel when we were both in Japan earlier this year. Basically, is they win, quote unquote. They have de facto control over Indochina, Singapore, Dutch East Indies, etc., Philippines. But basically the Allies are going, yeah, sure, this is permanent. Yeah, well, absolutely. We'll turn this into an actual peace treaty later, honest, definitely. And then literally once Germany has been destroyed, like a year later, they come back and go, hey, so yeah, we've got the entire fleet that we had in the Atlantic and more construction that we built. Oh, and the Russians are here now. Yeah, no, I'm sorry. Those gains that you thought you had just made, no, thank you. Yeah, we'll have those back, please.
Yeah, at that point, you're fighting at the same time the world's largest economy, the world's largest army, empire. Oh, and the whole war started because you were in a quagmire with the world's largest population base. Good luck.
Yeah, and this is a Japan that will basically be like, sure, you might have actually reconstituted some level of air. You might have actually re-energized your carrier air wings by that point. If you give the Japanese about a year and a half of peacetime, they could probably get their carrier air wings refilled and at least to a basic level of competence so they aren't immediately slaughtered. But still, it's going to be, if we're generous, the core Kirabutai plus what the additions to their light carriers and Taiho Maybe Shinano if she's been completed as a carrier, but probably if they're winning that hard, she won't be. She'll be a battleship still. And that's your reinforcements in terms of assets worth a damn. And the Allies rock up with the North Carolinas, South Dakotas, Iowas. They might even actually be building the Montanas.
Yeah, and I mean, at that point, would the British Pacific Fleet have built, what was it, the Lion class they were thinking about, or at the very least, the Vanguard is coming online?
Oh yeah, Vanguard's rocking up, and I mean, Vanguard and Richelieu will work together. They've got pretty similar speeds and firepowers. 30-knot ships, both of them. And then, of course, there's a minor, tiny, itty-bitty issue of, oh yeah, Stalin's sledgehammer is battering through Manchuria. Have fun with that. Yeah,
I understand historically why Stalin was worried about a Japanese stab in the back, but boy, when it actually came down to it, the Japanese army was no match for the Red Army at all.
Oh yeah, because literally they thought maybe we should attack the Russians rather than getting involved in the Western powers. Tries to push Kankin Gol in 38-39, gets absolutely creamed by the Russian C team.
Right, yeah, not even their best.
And they go, no. And basically the Imperial Japanese Army goes, no. Just the constant level of nope coming out of the... Oh, good lord. Anyway, a joke aside.
In a situation like that where there was a temporary peace, how that would have been, as I'm sure it would have been, spun as an outright victory to the Japanese population. We made the Americans and British surrender. They've let us keep our possessions. Never mind all the ships sunk and all the dead and how we failed in most of our actual conquests, and we were.
And China's still ongoing. We haven't solved that yet.
Yeah. The Philippines are still liberated. India didn't revolt.
Yeah,
that's probably a whole different topic, but it is really interesting to me how I hear a lot about how the Germans screwed up in the Soviet Union. All the populations and minority groups that hated Stalin were ready to fight against them, and then they realized the Nazis were. The Japanese had the same problem. They thought, the Indians, the Vietnamese, the Indonesians, the Filipinos, they're all going to rise up with us against their European colonial bastards. And they all thought, yeah, we may not like being a colony, but they sure treat us a lot better than the Japanese army does. So
the only place they succeeded was Indonesia.
Sorry?
The only place they succeeded was Indonesia. The Indonesians were the only ones to really jump on board with the whole co-prosperity idea. But
and I think Ireland did also, but my understanding of that is it was more pragmatic. We don't want to be in, so we're just going to say, hey, Japan, we're on your side. Trust us.
Thailand was basically riding it for everything they could get, but keeping the Japanese at a wary arm's reach as much as they possibly could. There's a reason why literally everyone went. Thailand's peace deal in the war was literally give back the little bits of French Indochina you took, but otherwise that's it. No change in government, no change in anything like that. It's just okay. This happened, and you were between a rock and a hard place. Like you didn't really do anything to help the Axis, so I guess we're fine. Lol. But yeah, so I feel like it's a very, very interesting. I'll tell you what, there's something we haven't discussed. So I'm just gonna take a 2-minute break because I have to check on something real quick. So while I'm gone, would you run us through how both sides' reinforcements work, how they come in across the turns? Because that'll be really interesting to people, like what reinforcements arrive when.
Sure. And that first picture I see is up in the channel. You can see part of the reinforcement chart over the edge. Probably not enough to really tell what's going on, but there's a chart. It is purely based on roughly the historical time of when the ships became available. The British have to send some ships back to the Mediterranean, like I said. The Americans really should have to send an old battleship or two back in the middle of the game for Normandy, but they don't. The Japanese get a few of their carriers in on turns 2 and 3. the Junyo and Hyo and the Shoho, which wasn't quite online yet when the war began. And they get Yamato and Masashi in the middle of the game. And in terms of capital ships, that's really it until the last couple of turns. They get the Taiho, the Amagi, some of those late game carriers they rushed in that had, poorly trained air groups, or in some case, barely any air groups, at all. The British get in the Warspite and Valiant, the Shropshire, Dorsetshire, Devonshire are there. I hope I'm saying those right. I always said Dorsetshire when I was a kid, and then I was later informed that's incorrect. But anyway, they do get the Victorious in, and as it did historically, it can show up on the east side of the board with the American fleet, where it was a desperately needed ally when we were down to just the Enterprise in Saratoga, and the Saratoga was repairing torpedo damage half the time, it seemed. The Americans tend to get in a battleship or two every turn. Either some of those World War I battleships that were transferring over, Idaho, Colorado, and then they get the South Dakota and Washington class, and then the Iowa class in late game. All four of those are in. And then they get the Wasp in the middle of the game. They do not ever get the Ranger. It did go to the Pacific, but it was considered a poor design. I mean, it really was a poor design, granted. So were Jinyo and Hyo, but the Japanese, I think, used those more because they just needed something. Whereas by the time Ranger came over, the Essex class was out in full force and the Ranger was not needed. So all it did was train. So the Ranger's not there, but all 9, I believe, of the Independence class light carriers show up that were light cruisers that they switched halfway through construction to put decks on them. And then 8 to 10 of the Essex class show up. All of those Essex and Independence are turn 6 through 8. So yes, as I see from the comment here in Discord, those U.S. fast carrier forces start to come in heavily on turns 6 and 7. Which is also when the American torpedoes finally start working. So the Americans get the F boat in the game for fleet boat. The Japanese have the I boat. The joke, and maybe not that funny of a joke, is the F is for finally a freaking sub boat. That's one of those interesting alt histories I never see much of. Is what if the American torpedoes had worked 2 years earlier? But maybe it's not a common alt history scenario because, the Japanese get slaughtered 2 years earlier. Is that really that interesting? But anyway, in the game, that comes in late. And I also see a question, the British Pacific Fleet. We addressed that a little bit earlier. It mostly shows up about the time the game is ending. And so it's not in the game. There was a magazine that Avalon Hill put out called The General for many years. And a reader once threw in, hey, if you want to play with the British Pacific Fleet, here's what I think it would be and how it should work. And the designer actually responded with his own article saying, well, I disagree with some of that, but I think so here's my own, semi-official designer variant based on the user variant, where again, the Indefatigable, I believe the King George V and Anson, maybe it was that. I'm not sure the exact lineup of ships. Fleet sounded like he knew more than I did what they were. The Richelieu comes in with the British as well. The main reason it's not in the game is if you extended the game a little and added, the Japanese are just going to lose every time. So the alternate rule kind of has to give them some bonus points earlier in the game and the extra time and the extra counterattack if you extend the game through the end of 44.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I suppose as the Japanese, your big thing is you need to really leverage your... Are both sides land-based air the exact same in terms of stats, or are there multiple different types of land-based air? Are there torpedo bombers, medium bombers? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, they're just kind of generic air units, which have the Japanese ones are slightly more powerful. Which again, I think it's a consequence of it's a physical game. You only have so many counters. Probably, if you wanted to be historical and they weren't caring about the size of the print run and the price of the game, you could throw in some alternate counters to make the Japanese weaker as the game goes on. Maybe every time that every time that they're lost, they come back weaker because land-based air aren't permanently gone in the game, because being lost in the game means withdrawn from front line to reconstitute. It doesn't mean every last plane and pilot's gone like it is with a ship. With a ship being sunk, the ship's just gone, of course. Although you can get sunk in shallow harbor water and be repaired. Typically happens. Yeah, typically happens to some of the ships in Pearl Harbor. They can take double damage in port, but if they've taken more than the normal move, they're stuck on the mud until they're repaired. Occasionally, the Allies get a chance to raid a ship repairing in Japan and knock it to the mud like that. It's rare, but fun when that happens. And now that I went on about repairs, I sort of forgot the original question. Land-based air, yes. So yeah, the land-based air have 3 airstrike factors for the Japanese and 2 for the Americans, and none of them get the bonus. You know, as Midway, among other things, illustrated, level bombing isn't the greatest at attacking a moving ship in open water, but they are harder to take out because those carriers do not get the bonus against them. So they're not especially potent offensive weapons, but they're great defensive weapons. They can't be disabled out of the area other than having their base invaded, and they can't. And they reduce the firepower of carriers against them. So that Soryu getting those 3 bonus shots is 3 regular shots against a land-based air. And the difference between bonus and regular is pretty simple in the game. A bonus shot hits twice as much. Your combat rating in the game is the number of dice that ship rolls. 6 hits the target and inflicts a reroll of 1d6 of damage. And a 5 disables the target, which sends it back to base but inflicts no lasting damage. It's an abstract dozens of things. Engine trouble, lost in the fog, captain was timid, orders were mixed up. And it's also kind of a just make the effective battle right, because players in a game can be much more cavalier and flippant with cardboard than a real admiral would ever be with real men and real steel.
Oh, of course, absolutely.
So if you played the game without that disabled result, combat would be very ahistorically bloody. But so if you roll a 5, you're sending your opponent back out of the fight, but their ship's still around for next turn. But you can't do that against a land-based air. The disable has no effect. If you get a bonus, you hit on a 5 or 6 and disable on a 4. But again, you also don't get that bonus against land-based air, so you've got to get natural 6s to knock them out of the sky, which again makes them great defensive weapons for protecting your ports that may be under siege while your fleet maybe waits for the raid move and either reinforce them or go fight elsewhere and hope your land-based air can save the day. Is that enough rambling on the combat, or do you want me to throw a little picture of a battle in and talk about it? I'll ramble as much or little as you want if there's other stuff you want to move on to.
I mean, I'm more than happy to have discussions on the combat. I think it's a really good idea.
Okay, let me throw another image up for you there that I took from a face-to-face game some years ago, and hope it'll make some amount of sense. What we have here is 3 Japanese cruisers on their patrolling side, meaning they're there to stay. They're trying to control the area around Samoa, flip that American flag to a Japanese flag. And the other way to seize bases in this game that I haven't mentioned is if you flag the sea zone around them, or all the sea zones around them. In the case of you may be able to see the edge of the image. The New Hebrides there straddles the U.S. mandate in Coral Sea, so you'd have to flag both for 2 turns in a row. It falls due to lack of supplies and isolation. So the Japanese are trying to do that, and the Americans have come out to fight. They've got 1 land-based air. That's the green 2-4 unit there on the left. The Japanese raiding forces come in with 4 carriers. My image is a little washed out. I know
that is a heavy commitment. That is a very heavy Japanese commitment.
That is, again, my photography skills are lacking. The image is a bit washed out, but that's Akagi, Zuikaku, Soryu, and Zuiho. Any 1 land-based air unit in the game is mathematically a favorite over any carrier. But 4 carriers to 1, not so great. But the Allies have reinforced it with Saratoga and a larger surface fleet than Japanese, including 3 new battleships that have came in, and 2 of them some damage markers around. you can go out with damage in this game. It's not always a great idea, but maybe they're ships. They're probably ships that were raided in Pearl Harbor, partially repaired, and are being rushed out there. Which happened with the Yorktown historically.
Yeah.
And so the combination of this is actually a pretty even battle, because even the Saratoga with one land-based air unit is less powerful than 4 Japanese carriers, but they could win that fight. They've also got a larger service navy, so if they're able to
5 battleships and a significantly advanced force of cruisers.
Even with the bonus dice that the Japanese cruisers get for the long lances, just the ISA in those cruisers versus battleship going to be the favorite. And with the flag on your side, you've got a surface battle. If you're going into enemy waters, trying to force a surface battle is really difficult, and carriers may win by themselves. But in this case, there's a good chance of that surface battle, and if you outnumber on the surface, you can turn some extra shots on. Easier to do in the game than it was in reality, but it does make the surface navy important as escort. So if the Allies get their night round here, then the surface combat happens. A couple of those battleship guns are probably going to take out maybe Soryu and Zuikaku. And, again, a quibble on the factor of Akagi being 4 for armor like a battleship. I think that's too much. Yes, it had a battleship hull, but we saw how much that mattered in reality. But I feel like this is a case where 2 wrongs might have made a right, because it's easier to shoot at carriers with surface ships than it was historically. So, yeah, maybe the battleship hull comes into play, but either way, you do not want Akagi going up against the New Mexico and Colorado on the surface.
I'm sorry. Issei's just screaming. Issei's captain and crew are just screaming. Like, that is 5 US standards rocking up, including I think there's one there with 16-inch guns.
Yes, that's the Maryland there. Yeah, the ones with the 5. The only ships that get 5 gunnery are the 16-inch guns. So
that's one of the Colorados showing up. That's just that's.
The 3 Colorados get them: Nagato and Mutsu, and then the Iowa, South Dakotas, and then as was shown, I think in one of the earlier images, the Yamato and Masashi are the only ones that get 6 for guns. This was based on a shorter and simpler game called C. John Edwards, an Australian designer, actually did that one about the Atlantic War. It's much shorter and much less realistic with this, because they kind of had to overpower the German fleet to give the Axis any chance in the game. Oof. But the Nelson and Rodney get 5s in that game with the same logic, the 16-inchers there. The Japanese, the Allies also, you really want to concentrate, but maybe not too much, on those 3 patrolling cruisers. Because if you lose the battle and retreat, but before you do that, you have sunk or disabled the 3 patrolling cruisers, Japan does not place the flag in the U.S. mandate. So they don't block the supply line from Hawaii to Australia. They don't get the 2 points. They don't get the modifier to surface versus carrier action in a future battle. So sometimes you get to shoot second as the Allies too. Results of the combat are identical. Are simultaneous. But you get to see what damage the Japanese have inflicted on you before you fire back. So if the battle's going badly, you may just turn your battleships on the 3 patrolling cruisers, and then the raiding ships can't get any points. If it's going well, you want to spread your fire out and, again, take out the Issei, take out a couple of those carriers, just inflict as much damage as you can. And that's kind of your targeting priority there. Each ship in the game fires at one individual other ship. So those 4 shots from the Issei are all going on one ship, probably another battleship. You can't spread them out 1, 2, 3, and 4. Just, again, trying to count your shots and spread them out like that would take much longer, whereas it works pretty nicely to just line up your counters. Okay, he's shooting at him, they're shooting at them. Now let's roll them out.
Mm-hmm.
And, as far as somebody just backtracking a bit on that, just for a little thing I like to discuss on that, because there is no AI for this game on any of the computer implementations. I think the big reason that games in this genre don't have AI is just they're so niche. No one's going to get famous for doing it. You make a great new chess or Go, AI. The world knows who you are, and you make it rich off the product. You're making a good AI for Victory in the Pacific or Hannibal or Paths of Glory or whatever else. A few hundred or a few thousand people say, "Oh man, that's amazing," and nobody else knows about it. But the possibilities in this game are, I think, I have not done extensive math on it. I suspect the number of playable positions is even greater than chess or Go. Just as one example, I'll throw one that I like here out into the chat, where this is kind of an example of something that may happen in the late game. The Japanese are kind of doing a suicidal bonsai charge here. This one's from the Vassal module. The Allies are trying to seize the Marshalls with the Yorktown and Essex and some other ships, but they've only got the 2 patrolling cruisers there, De Ruyter and Baltimore. And so the Japanese say, you know what? It's my own control flag, which again represents we've got scout planes and subs and destroyers out. So there's a decent chance of forcing a surface action. We're going to send out 2 battleships unprotected by carriers, try and target 1 on each patrolling ship. If we get those, the Allies don't get the point, don't place the flag. Definitely, probably suicidal. Fuso and Nagato.
This is kind of a Tengo moment. This is kind of a Tengo moment.
It's kind of suicidal, but this is a case where this isn't a game player being too gamey. This is something it's the type of thing the Japanese try to do. And it's a very bonsai mentality here. The Fuso and Nagato got 4 and 5 armor. The Baltimore's got 2. De Ruyter's got 1. And I'll spare you the long detailed math, but a ship with N armor can end the turn in 2 N+1 different states based on whether it was disabled, sunk, damaged, or not. So one exchange of fire here where Fuso and Nagato try and take out the cruisers and then the Allied surface fires back. There's 4,000 different possibilities for that. Now, as a player, I don't think of that as 4,000. I just think, did I get the patrollers or not? But if your computer's trying to analyze this position, unless you've given it some fuzzy logic to there, every round of fire, you're multiplying by another. So, your playable possibilities in this game are thousands to the power of thousands at this point. So I wouldn't be surprised if in my lifetime that's capability, but I don't even think the impressive AI of today is quite solving a game like this yet.
I
could be wrong because maybe nobody who's good enough is trying because it's a niche enough esoteric product. But that's my opinion on it, at least.
Yeah, absolutely. Fair opinion. Right, so I don't think there's anything about the game we haven't actually discussed. Is there anything that you feel like we haven't covered that we probably should?
I think that's the main bits of it. If anybody is interested enough to find out more, I can throw a couple things out there. There's a website called Gameaholics.com. It's just a married couple who plays many games together and both enjoy this game. It hosts some actual online ladders, but it also just has veritable buttloads of information about it. Gameaholics is also working on a reprint of the game. Again, I don't know. I'm not directly involved. I know them, talk with them occasionally and get updates. I don't know exactly how that works with the production and the rights to it and stuff, but they're making actually a whole series where there will be a victory in the Pacific and then a victory in the Atlantic and then a worldwide victory that can link the two if you want to spend all day playing the entire naval of World War II. And then they may be doing a World War I game also. They're hoping to get that out in Kickstarter later this year. It may be 2027, but they're hoping for this year. I'll throw a couple of pictures of it again for those who can see. It's going to use some pieces that have the colors on them, but also have a black and white image of the ship rather than just the silhouette. And the pieces are going to be a little larger. That is high or they're using, by the way, for these pieces. Anyone's playing. You got with the cardboard cutouts for the hobbits or elves or sea monsters or whatever you've got. It's similar quality to that.
Now that's better. That is actually the force available to the British for the Indian Ocean raid.
Yeah, this is about that historical time. I believe the photo there is from the second turn of the game. It's hard to tell there, but Singapore,
but also
Saigon.
That is a significant American.
The Allied flag. So Singapore
That is a significant
Sorry?
American commitment there. That is a significant American commitment to
This is
Cup.
the British forces available in the Indian Ocean Raid facing those 3-3. There are Japanese land-based air, but yes, the Enterprise in Yorktown and an American air unit have joined the fray. This is a massive battle for the fate of Singapore, going on sometime in early 42 in that picture.
I'm also
Even the
noticing
Hermes is there,
Yeah.
which
I'm also
is-
noticing the air units are not identical here. They actually seem to have included aircraft type.
that is just for historical interest, but the pictures are different. Yes.
Well, no. The
They're-
Japanese air units are 3-3s, and the 11th Air Force is 2-3.
Yes, the Allied air units in the game have one less airstrike factor.
Ah, right. I get it.
But there are more of them. By the time middle of the game, you get the 13th and 14th Air Force. You get the Royal New Zealand and Australian Air Forces in. The Japanese can never have more than 6 air counters at a time, or the Allies with 10. And even that may slightly underrate their historical numbers. But again, I think there's some game balance involved in that.
Yes, the sheer amount of "I will drown you in aircraft" probably doesn't need to be said.
And they're hoping for an alternative option to actually use plastic minis for the ships that I threw in there of some of the picture, I think, from turn 5 when the Victorious joins the American fleet for a turn. They're going to be Axis and Allies like plastic pieces with a little sidebar attached with the ship factors on them, for those who want to have the tactile feel and look for some extra price. Or you can go with the lower price for the cardboard. I'm enough of the fan of the game where I'm probably getting both.
Absolutely.
And I've got many old copies of the game. I definitely like it. The graphics, they're not bad. They're functional. They're definitely dated looking. So I'm hoping the new look there will help it appeal to some of the younger gamer crowd. My nephew is 12 and he loves naval ships, and I've played this game with him a couple of times. And it's kind of funny because he said something like, "Hey, Uncle Daniel, I want you to play me in this game because I want to learn it, and I don't want you to go easy on me. I don't like it when adults go easy." He knew not of what he asked, given that I studied this game and have played it championships and stuff. But I decided to just start the game for time's sake in the middle of 1942 in the historical position. After Midway, the Japanese have suffered grievous attrition and have no perimeter, and that actually made for a good balanced game. And I didn't have to go easy on him. I actually had to try my best to keep from losing badly because the historical Japanese position after that was so awful. But so I'm hoping for the sake of him and others like that he'll have they'll have these nicer, newer sets to look at. But again, he didn't mind the old. I appreciate that. And that's the game. And if anybody's just interested in knowing more about it, I've got victoryinthepacific@gmail.com. Email me with questions, comments, insults, whatever,
So I have been leading the charge here in terms of questions, but if the audience on YouTube and Discord has any questions about Victory in the Pacific, now would absolutely be the time. Please ask away.
Yeah, and if we get none of those and want to open it up to just general World War II naval questions, we were talking about this some earlier. I think I can contribute a fair amount to that. I've heard you guys seem to know quite a lot more about the Cold War than me, so if anyone has those questions, I'll just shut up and learn. But if we got World War II stuff, I'm game for giving my thoughts, and I'll try and relate them to the game if I can. In fact, let me see. While we're waiting, let me just throw one more thing out there. The sheer number of dice rolled in this game is a lot, which again, I think actually lessens the factor of luck, because when you're rolling a few hundred dice, one bad roll you can't blame your whole game on one bad roll when you're rolling that in. Now, some rolls are more important than others. A key, a key role in a imbalanced battle where one side is heavy on surface, light on carriers, of what sort of battle you're fighting, or just shots on carriers in general are more important. But there's a couple of major face-to-face tournaments of this game that go on. One in Wisconsin that's just for this game, and it's also part of the World Board Gaming Championships that are in Pennsylvania every year, which, I mean, given that it's always in Pennsylvania, maybe it's more of the North American champions, but Victory in the Pacific has had a Scottish champion and one from Singapore in its history, where we thought that maybe since he's the only lives on the Victory in the Pacific map, maybe he had an advantage in the game. But anyway, that may be the most impressive of all the World Board Gaming Championships annual titles was Meng Ong's title, because he flew around the world and was on a completely different time zone and jet lagged and still managed to win the whole event.
Smoked it. Absolutely just walked away with it.
But so there's those two, and then there's two different online play by email. There's a tournament, a single elimination tournament that happens, and there's an ongoing ladder where it's just a way of getting a new opponent. It's not a massive player base. A lot of people don't have a lot of people they know near where they live. So you can always get an opponent every few months with that ladder. But those four all feed into a top 10 invitational tournament, where if you've won one of those or have been highly rated enough from doing well in those, the top 10 who accept that get their own round robin. You're playing it online because it's open anywhere in the world. So it takes 2 years to get through. But over 2 years, all the top 10 play all the other 9. Ultimate champion of the champions. The same man has won that the last 6 iterations in a row. So for all the luck in the dice, if there were that much luck in the game, surely he would have faltered somewhere along the line. I mean, he's lost an there, but after everyone plays all 9, he's got the best record for 12 straight years now. I have played him 10 or 11 times myself between face-to-face and online over the past couple of decades. I think I've only beaten him twice, and one of those was that rare 1 in 100 pure luck fest. I claim very little credit. Other than that, I and nobody else can figure out how to strategize the guy on a regular basis. And I think that's a testament to both the skill needed in the game and the staying power of a 50-year-old game, that you've still got people competing for it at a high level, trying to unseat this guy year after year. If anything, I'm also just impressed he's still playing. My worry is he's just going to get bored of it unless somebody figures out how to beat him consistently.
I mean, we have introduced a bunch of people who are very, very interested in naval history to the idea that these ladder matches exist. So, yes, this may be something that might exist. So we will see. Bringing new blood in is not bad. Does no one else have any questions? We have got quite a small audience today. So I mean, we'll have to see what happens.
Scare your listeners away.
It's all right.
A question.
Go on then.
So, do you have a preference in terms of which side you like to play?
I find it more fun to play the Allies, not by a lot, but I think the challenge of having the smaller fleet for the first few turns and warding off the offensive, I find that more interesting. I think I'm better with the Japanese than I am with the Allies. Some of these tournaments have a Nagumo and a Halsey award, for example, for the best Japanese record at the event and the best Allied record event. I've got a few Nagumos over the years. I have never managed to win myself a Halsey award. It's on my list of things that I challenge myself to do. But of course, at a given event, I may not go for it. If I end up playing my first couple of games and winning both as Japan, go for the Nagumo. Or I just lose my first few games and I'm not going to win any award. This is a little off topic on that question, I guess, but losing early games in a tournament is actually kind of interesting, because once I'm out of contention, it's kind of freeing to all right, here's the time where I'm going to try out this new strategy or new tactic that I've wanted to see how it works against real players, but I don't want to try it for the first time with a title on the line. But if I'm playing for nothing at all, I mean, we're not playing for much at all anyway. We're just playing for a plaque and the bragging rights of our peers. Nobody's got any money riding on this, which is probably healthy for the environment and sportsmanship. But again, there's not a lot of chances I get to just play a casual face-to-face game unless I can get my nephew or maybe my son when he's a little older to play more. So getting a chance to face another top player in a game where nothing counts, it's like, all right, now I'm going to try that thing I always wanted to try that probably won't work, but I got to see it happen in reality first.
Then what are some wacky tactics you've encountered or heard of so far?
There's one particular player who would always come to the Midwest Open, which is it's near Milwaukee. It's been going on for like 30 years. It's one of those face-to-face tournaments I mentioned. He would wear a tuxedo, and as the Japanese, he would make a point to, in the early game, put at least one patroller or land-based air in every single area of the board turn. Theoretically threatening to flag and control every point he could get, every point that there was in the game. Of course, it was never going to happen, but nobody else really played that way. And as the Allies, you're thinking, oh, he's got small forces everywhere instead of a few bigger ones. This is easy. I can pick them off and I can defeat him in detail. But it's really easy to pick off more that you can chew that way and fight so many small battles. And the Japanese forces take enough stuff down with you that when you have the smaller fleet, you don't really want one-on-one attrition. You want to use your last move edge to inflict more losses than you sustain. Because
and with that many battles, luck may actually start to play.
True. That's another thing. That's one reason I like luck skill mixed games. I dislike the concept that luck and skill must sum to a constant, and more of one means less than the other. I mean, look at tic-tac-toe. There's no luck in that game at all, but there's not much skill in either. Done properly, I think adding luck adds some skill, because setting your own risk-reward level is a skill. Judging how risky your opponent is or isn't going to be is a skill. And just psychologically, handling the swings of luck while staying on an even keel is important. If you have an issue with swings of luck and bad luck gets you riled up and frustrated easily, you're not going to play as well as someone who's like, bad dice happen. What's going to happen next? What can I do now? And so, part of the advantage of the tuxedo strategy is if you're one of the, a mid-ranked player trying to upset a better player, you're throwing more luck into the game, and B, you're throwing them into a situation they're not used to, where their tried and true expert moves, they may have to come up with something new. I had one player use that theory against me at an event a few years back. He was a champion back in the 90s, played in 20 years. So his thought was, the meta has evolved. If I kind of know what it's evolved to. If I just play into that, these guys have been doing it. I'm rusty. They're going to win. I got to come up with something new. And without making too much of a detour, this man used that same theory in chess even. He would come to chess tournaments having studied traps from like the 1870s. Traps that had been refuted. Someone came up with it in the 1870s and someone refuted it in the 1880s. But that doesn't mean that even obviously a world champion player is not going to fall for it, but he's not trying to be a world champion. He's trying to win his local city tournament. And even the good players there may not know the refutation. So he kept getting people with these old school traps, and once made I don't know the details, but he's made a tremendous blunder. And he almost just resigned immediately once he hit the clock and looked at his board and said, I can't believe I did that. And then he watched as his opponent did not take advantage of it. And they talked about it after the game. And he said, did you not see my blunder there? I thought I was done for sure. And the guy said, well, that was a blunder? I thought for sure that was another one of your tricks. He got such a reputation. But yeah, he came at me with something I'd never seen before. like I mentioned, if anyone's been following along for the over an hour, the Japanese don't have the logistical restrictions they have, and can and often do go after Samoa or Hawaii to try and either take it or force a big battle where maybe they can get the edge. He decided to go for Hawaii with 6 aircraft carriers, no surface ships at all. So he could use his surface ships to lock down other areas on the rest of the. And I'm looking at that and thinking, well, I've got 5 carriers as the Americans. The British carriers can't get from Ceylon all the way to Pearl Harbor. So I got 5 carriers that can face his 6. That's not a good trade for me. He's got more firepower. And even if I trade 5 for 5, he's still got Junyo, Hio, Hosho around else left until the Wasp comes in a couple turns. I don't want to make that trade. I could send my whole surface fleet in. He's got no escort, so I would get to fight his carriers with my battleships. But it is easier to force a carrier action than a surface action, as it should be. And do I really want all those early game, well-trained bonus pilots ravaging my surface fleet, which will just potentially sit there impotently and get sunk for no avail? I'm just looking at this move thinking, I don't know how to do this. There's probably a good move against this, but I got to come up with it on the fly in a time limit scenario because, you got to eventually finish the game and get on to the next round. I did end up winning the game, but the fact that he, with his 20 years of rust, had instantly evened the gap down to nothing, I thought was really impressive. And I decided to use that myself when I faced Ed Polly later, the man I mentioned earlier, who's been the champion of champion 6 iterations in a row. And he said pretty much the same thing. Wow, you have upped the ante on this. There is if I go into this fight, it's a massive luck swing. I could never. He said I could never use this against anyone else because I don't want a massive luck swing. But this is, not really arrogantly, just with the honest confidence that comes with being as good as he is. He said, "Yeah, this is the great move that you should use against me." And of course, he still ended up winning the game. But that is the wackiest thing I'd ever saw. I'm just watching him make the move, thinking, "Is he really doing it? He's really going to do it. Oh my God, he's really doing it. What do I do now?"
So what did he decide to do?
What?
What did he decide to do?
The example where the player used it against me was he sent a pure carrier force with no surface escort to try and flag the Hawaiian Islands. Which
Well,
take Hawaii, that's 3 points I don't get. That's 2 points that he gets. Any of my ships in Pearl Harbor would be unable to move out past that control flag until they fought a battle next turn. It's bad. But usually to do that takes the majority of the Japanese fleet. And the fact that he did it without using a single surface ship was freed up his surface navy to do other things elsewhere on the board. Moving into Guadalcanal or into the Aleutian Islands. Not a lot of points up in the Aleutians, but still better than nothing.
No, I was wondering if he decided to throw the entire American fleet to just chase down the 6 carriers, or what did he do? What was the counter move?
I was the Americans in that case, and what I ended up doing against it was throwing one. I figured odd move deserves another. I threw one battleship by itself against that fleet. I figured if he gets a carrier action, okay, he sinks one ship. But that way, I don't risk any of my carriers, and if I get to force a surface action, I at least get to take down one of his carriers cheaply. And I did, actually. Knight came up on the roll, so it's a surface battle, and the Maryland, I think it was, took out the Kiryu or Shokaku, and the carriers themselves, not having a lot of gunnery, just disabled the Maryland out of the area with light damage. So I got a carrier for free, but he still came out of it okay because he placed that flag in Hawaii without using any of his surface navy on it, so they could go do other things.
I see.
Lock down the Marshall Islands. Maybe I don't remember exactly where he put his ships after 5 years, but
makes sense. Right. So, we are coming up on 7:30 for me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open it to... so we're going to work through whatever questions there are. and then we'll open up to regular questions for the last half an hour, because I do unfortunately have to sleep, sadly. It's one of those things that is unfortunately part of human existence. Can't get around it, unless you're Dr. Alex Clark, in which case he just is an insomniac and just doesn't. But anyway, so Team asks, when will Fleet try the online ones? When I have time. And at some point when I get around to it. It's a game I find interesting, but I was more interested in actually bringing someone on to discuss it, learn more about it, and introduce the audience to it. Whether or not I will actually get around to playing it, I have no idea. But I definitely wanted to bring this to more people's attention, and I definitely wanted to learn more about it.
Yeah, and if you ever want to, I'm happy to walk you through like a training game, or I always find it really interesting the rare chances I get to walk people through a training game at once, because I get to just observe what two beginners do, not knowing the strategy and meta. And I mean, I hope that not in an insulting way, just you're a beginner, you play like a beginner, and that's what I did when my friend and I played it in high school. I'm sure the moves that we made then were awful by expert standards, but it was still fun. And it's fun to get to see that again and kind of take me back to the nostalgia of when I was first learning. I see somebody ask what changes would be made to adapt it to the late ironclad age. I have not seen that successfully done. I've seen variants on Victory in the Pacific and War at Sea done for World War One. I've seen one that I think a Japanese publisher did for the Russo-Japanese War, and I think that worked okay. I've seen an attempt to adapt it to the Cold War, and I don't think that works. I think this game system works for guided missile ships, and even the Midway class coming in in the Montana class that could have come in if the war had lasted longer, strain the game system to its limits. The late ironclad age and torpedo boats, I'd love to give that a great answer. Interesting idea. I've never thought of that before. You would definitely need a smaller and a different scale, because the speeds on these ships range from 3 to 8, and they roughly translate to the maximum speed in knots divided by 3. And so having everybody with a move speed of 0, 1, or 2 may not work so well. She'd have to trade the scale a bit to get some more granularity in the shooting.
I think what you could do is you would have to completely shift the setting, but you could really run an interesting game with this with up to, hang on, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, Venezuela, Ecuador, Peru, Brazil, Paraguay, Argentina, Chile, with up to 8 people. And you basically move the theater to South America from 1860 to about 1905. And you give people options to bid for. You have a set pool of ships that are available, and that's all that is available, because that's what's being built in the yards of the various major navies, and the players have to bid for them each turn to decide if that ship's gonna get assigned to them. And of course, they have to keep up the bidding war to make sure that they don't get outbidded again. And you get the income for that from a set of control points that you have. And you can also reduce another person's control point by fighting battles and blockading them, therefore reducing their access to international trade.
That does sound really.
And that way you avoid the whole premise of actually having to deal with the major naval powers, because that would be, given the sheer scale of the ironclad production that was undertaken and the level of ships involved, it would be too much for a game system like this. But if you have a set series of ships that can be bought and will be built, and they will always...
Sorry, go ahead.
And these ships will always be built at the same time. So let's say the 2 battleships that the Brazilians get will be built at a certain point. But let's say they may not enter service for Brazil, or Brazil might get one because they bid for it. but Argentina may have put in a successful bid for the other one. To the famous Chilean ironclad Huascar, famous Peruvian ironclad Huascar, she may end up in service to Chile, or she might have been bought by Colombia or Venezuela. Like, all these historical ships could end up in any different part of this whole thing. And of course, you would also have the premise of, okay, that's your ironclads, but you've also got your cruising vessels, your unprotected cruisers, your screw frigates, etc. And basically, that would be how you would do it, because that way you've got that level of consistency you need for this. You've not got the Royal Navy being overly dominant, or the French being so far ahead of everyone else prior to the Franco-Prussian War that they may as well be a second Royal Navy, and their only real threat is the Royal Navy. Here, you've got a set series of ships that will come in from the period from like 1860 through to 1905, and it's up to the players to decide what they're going to bid for. What do they need? Who are they planning to fight? Who are they going to ally with? Who are they not going to ally with? Are they going to backstab somebody? Etc. etc.
Yeah, so these ships are being built in Boston or Plymouth or something, and you're the South American buying them from the major powers.
Yeah, and you would be bidding against other players. And the whole point is, it's how much is this ship worth, and you would get the points by fighting wars to either if you fight wars and win, like obviously you wouldn't really change the map because you don't want to deny anyone access to the sea, but you would have border revisions like that would be represented as, that the Paraguayans have won this war, they've taken the disputed territory, therefore they get a slight boost to their economy, but also most importantly, it gives the Navy minister more points to bid on ships that are being built. And that's how you do it. So basically, it's risk versus reward. Do you go for, let's say, as Paraguay, do you go for a... Do you not bid for ironclads? And do you... Because I think there should be gimmies. So I reckon you should be able to basically always get screw corvettes or screw frigates, like of a generic type that aren't historical ships. So there's always something available to be bid for, but obviously as they're not ironclads, they're not gonna stand up in an action against an ironclad. But what you could do is you could say, okay, do I bid for an ironclad, or do I bid for 2 to 3 screw corvettes and go off and raid commerce on the high seas, forcing the Brazilians to commit their own screw frigates to fight me, which therefore, leaves them open to my own more limited ironclads to try and force an action on my terms.
Yeah, that sounds really fun. I would totally play a game like that. The bidding reminds me a little. I hope I'm not just picking the first bidding game with combat that comes to mind. Reminds me a little of Cyclades. If you play that, where you have to bid on the Greek infighting, where you have to bid on the various gods. If you want a naval move, you have to bid on an offering for Poseidon or whatnot. But instead of the gods, you're bidding on who's going to pay the Royal Navy for their new ship.
Yeah.
Yeah, like who's gonna are the Peruvians gonna put in the bid for Huascar that did historically, or is Chile gonna nab off with a bigger bid? Is Paraguay under Solano Lopez going to succeed in his wars, and is he then going to keep the fleet that he bid for? That's the thing. You could lose a nation could start a war deliberately to prevent another nation from getting ships they bid for, or to take bidding points off them, and that would be strategy as well. And coalitions, if Brazil has been consistently winning bidding wars, and are building up an overwhelming strength, then suddenly, you've just made yourself the target of a coalition by basically necessity, because the alternative is you just win the game. Because the winner would be the person who had a clear capital ship advantage of at least of at least being twice as large as the two other largest navies combined. Basically, what I would call the 2-power standard victory for South America. That would be the goal. To have
I like that victory condition.
Yeah,
and that's a fair amount of potential complexity on top of the victory in the Pacific system, but you also you don't need any of the air power rules. So I think the overall complexity may not be that much when you're just dealing with surface combat.
You probably would have air power rules, but you change them to be torpedo boat rules, which would come in 1880 to 1890. And so basically, instead of air power, you'd have torpedo boats and destroyers as deployables, because they can't go far. They're not ocean-going assets, but they are powerful defensive assets to defend territory. And they can be a way that you can force an enemy to come. So let's say Paraguay is always going to be weaker than its neighbors, but if they have like a pair of ironclads and they're the first people to get torpedo boats, and you don't have to, and because of what torpedo boats are, you can hide them, and then you can basically declare war. The Brazilians come in and suddenly you declare, I have 2 flotillas of torpedo boats. And suddenly the Brazilians are like, well, we're committed now to the action. And we have to at least take one turn of these 2 flotillas coming at us with torpedoes. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I know when it comes to gaming, board games, I think in particular, but probably true for PC games too, ideas are kind of a dime a dozen. It's the execution that matters. But as far as ideas for war games go, that is one of the more unique and interesting ones I've heard in quite some time. I want there to be. I want this game to actually exist now.
Maybe I should start a Kickstarter for it. I'll run it by the I'll run it by the Shipshape lads, see if Drac and Dr. Clark want to see if we can make this a reality. Because yeah, I think that's definitely something to consider. So it looks like we don't have any more questions related to the topic at hand. So for people who are joining us, if anyone has any questions about victory at sea before we move on to a quick 20-minute slot of normal questions before we finish, now would absolutely be the time. Give you all a couple of minutes to put your oar in, as it were. And nope. Okay. I guess we have a question. So, what is Fleet's favorite Christmas food? I'm sorry, the Christmas ham. One does not simply not do the Christmas ham. The Christmas ham is just peak. You don't get to not have it. It is perfect, and it will be admired forevermore. Do the other members of the panel have a favorite Christmas food?
And not any one particular thing really comes to mind. I tend to be a fan of a good chewy cookie, though. But that's not. That's more common, I guess, when they're Christmas cookies. But I don't know that the chewy cookie is particularly a Christmassy dessert.
I have recently enjoyed the Japanese tradition of KFC for Christmas.
Oh yeah, that's the thing.
I've got one a question. If you want to answer this while I'm rambling, I could have Googled it, but I figured it'd be more interesting to ask you if you knew. When we were emailing before preparing for this podcast, you used the phrase "ship shape and Bristol fashion." Now, ship shape is an idiom I'm familiar with here in America. I have not heard Bristol fashion before. Do you know the etymology there? Did Bristol have the best shipyards or something?
It's basically just it was a portmanteau for basically everything being correct and orderly and as it should be. Bristol fashion, yeah. So like the yards in Bristol were known as some of the ones that could and did put out some of the earliest, basically all down to the influence of one Isambard King of Brunel. Some of the earliest successful iron hold steamships and steamships generally that were ocean going. And it just kind of stuck as
I didn't know that he was involved in that particularly, but given that he seemed to engineer everything else, it doesn't surprise me. Are you a fan of Mock the Week by any chance?
I am somewhat familiar with Mock the Week.
I've been listening to a fair amount of it in the car on the way to work, and I think it was Ed Gamble on one of them called Isambard Kingdom Brunel. It's the award for history's most successful, most famous, stupidest named person.
Yes.
I think it was Civilization 4 where I first learned about him. I learned a lot about a lot of things of history because I looked him up after playing that game, actually.
Yeah, so Knight 6831 asks, again, is William D. Porter's career of misfortune why she never got a successor, and is she part of Victory in the Pacific? So, as we said previously, as Daniel did say, destroyers and light cruisers are not represented in Victory in the Pacific. It's assumed that they're there and they exist, but they're not represented in any real way.
Yeah, I tend to presume they're especially there if, say, a cruiser gets a lucky boxcar roll. If Pensacola sinks Mutsu, like, could Pensacola have sunk Mutsu one-on-one? Probably not, but could Pensacola and a few destroyers facing Mutsu and a few destroyers, could Mutsu have been sunk in that? Sure. As far as William D. Porter, I mean, I guess the short version for those who don't know is President FDR was on board the battleship Iowa, and the William D. Porter, during a training exercise, live torpedo at the Iowa, which fortunately missed, and crew of military police or Marines or such was available at the next port to board the ship and make sure there wasn't actual treachery going on. Later, it was in the Aleutian Islands, and the base commandant was having dinner, and some sailor got drunk and started firing an anti-air gun off, and some of the shells landed in the yard. I think there's more, but those are the two incidents I'm aware of.
She does keep having problems.
I believe, and I do not know, but I think that they did never name another ship the William D. Porter, because sailors tend to be a superstitious lot, and that ship was associated with bad happenings and bad luck. That I think that is why they never reused the name. That's a guess, but I think that's the case. Also, there was a USS Canberra, just as a little trivia, built in World War II that is in Victory in the Pacific in honor of the Australian Canberra that sunk at Savo Island, which I believe is the only American vessel ever named for a foreign capital. There's a USS, there is, not in World War II, but there is a USS Winston Churchill, who I believe is the only American ship named. So those are your I'm 99% sure about them answers for the day.
Hey, nothing wrong with that. We claim to give answers. We don't claim to give good or accurate answers. As I always say, The Ramblings audience are for the most part, Ramblings audience, the Ramblings panel are for the most part not experts. If you think anything we say sounds slightly incorrect, please go and check it yourself. Do not take anything we say as gospel.
Because I should have just muted myself and furiously Googled it while I was waiting.
That's fine. You would not believe the amount of time we also have to do that. We have there are certain questions that we do file under the this could have just been a Google search question because that's what we're having to do ourselves.
Pretty much. After all, none of us are professional historians or anything, right?
Well, yes.
Everything we know is just whatever we know off the top of our head.
Yes. Right. So, it is 1945. Haha. Funny. The time is that. It's funny. So it looks like I'm not seeing any additional questions. And given that I do have work tomorrow, no, we don't have any questions formed by AI. I've not had any that have been that, or at least none that I've knowingly had that have been AI generated questions.
Oh no.
But anyway, so okay, we will finish off. We will finish off with Team Gunnery Officer's question, and then we'll wrap up slightly early, simply because I could do with the extra time to go and deal with some little bits and bobs before I actually have to head off for some sleep. So, if Shinano survived the submarine ambush, this is from Gunnery Officer, do you think the IJN could have used her as an effective aircraft carrier, and do you think the capability of the converted hull could be an effective aircraft carrier? She is a converted flat top. There's no reason to believe she would have been ineffective. She was intended as a repair ship and more like an aircraft ferry, and she would have probably been relatively effective in that role, but her lifespan would have been fairly short-lived, I reckon, given the US's proclivity for finding anything that was remotely flight deck shaped by 1945 and removing it from existence.
Yeah, and also, I mean, just the lack of quality pilots at that point. They had some experienced pilots around, but I believe most of them were not taking off from carriers at that point. They were being held back to defend against the B-29 raids or against the invasion that never came. If they had enough, decent pilots to take Shinano out to battle, I think her biggest use would have been, assuming that in this version the watertight doors are actually sealed correctly. Her biggest use would have been playing the RPS tank role, or as it were, somewhat like the Musashi played at Leyte Gulf. The main thing the Musashi did was be an obvious huge target that the damage done to her could have probably taken half a dozen ships out of the action instead. So probably the biggest thing that Shinano would have accomplished. Other carriers aren't getting it. Giant monster is taking 24 torpedoes.
Yeah,
but the preponderance of forces at that point means performing that role is of limited use, because your other stuff's still going to get hit. If nothing else, it's going to go back to port and get raided a couple months later. That's how a lot of the Japanese ships met their end in port in 1945.
Yeah.
I also see Knight 6281 says in YouTube it would have taken a 2,000 bomb to get through her armored deck. I don't know the deck thickness or the bomb mathematics, but I could believe that. That seems pretty reasonable. It had the Yamato hull. Those did not go down easily either.
Yep.
And I mean, we saw in several instances where the Royal Navy was attacked by kamikazes. The armored deck served them very well. Whereas, for example, I believe the USS was the Hancock. Both took a kamikaze to the deck and had to head back to Pearl Harbor or Australia for repairs. And I think it was Illustrious took multiple kamikazes to the flight deck and was back in action within an hour. Sweep the pieces overboard and all right.
Well, there is a fair bit of a meme to that. There is, it's kind of, the proof in the, what's the word? A grain of truth to the exaggeration. It wasn't quite sweep the decks off, but it was definitely it was definitely less of a problem than it was for certain US carriers, which is, oh fuck, I guess we're going back to Pearl.
Yeah, it was definitely at least we can stay in the theater and stay in action with the armored deck carriers.
Yep. Right. So
the armored deck also, doesn't help you against torpedoes. But in Shenandoah's case, I think she had a fair amount of torpedo protection as well, given the hull that she was built on.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank my panel for tonight. So I'd like to thank Moe, who was one of the regulars. I'd like to thank Daniel for being here. Absolute pleasure to talk to you. Really enjoyed learning a little bit about something I had not heard of prior to seeing it a couple of weeks ago. So very, very enjoyable. And as with every guest that we have had, you are absolutely welcome to come back anytime you wish. The door is always open.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I really enjoyed it.
And like I say, please come back anytime. Like, you know when we run?
Yeah.
It's the same every week. Obviously, we're taking so there will be no content from me, chaps, until January the 5th, when Ramblings will resume. There will be an entire break, but a normal service for Ramblings and the Rule the Wave streams will resume, hopefully, on January the 5th. And then I plan to expand outwards once again to really, really get going with more of the content. Really try and get back into the swing of things with everything, as I have been a little bit off kilter with certain things I have been dealing with. But that is all for the future. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Moe. Thank you, audience, for being here. Cracking audience. As always, take care, everybody, and I will see you all in the next year. Goodbye.